The 14th of June will mark 4 years since the Grenfell Tower disaster. The tower block, you'll obviously remember, that caught fire. The fire spread rapidly through the building, killing 72 people due to the highly flammable cladding used on the 23-storey flats. Despite the outlawing of the plastic foam insulation on the towers in 2018, the cladding can still be used on low-rise buildings. And since the Grenfell fire, the material has been used to build an estimated 70 schools, we've learned this morning. A representative for the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign, Natasha Letchford, is live on the programme. Morning, Natasha.
Morning.
What did you think reading this morning?
I have to say I'm not surprised, given the experiences and what we've seen. But it's obviously absolutely horrendous and shouldn't be happening. But yeah, as I say, not surprised. The government has consistently failed to get a grip on this crisis, and this is just another example of that, I think.
I guess the important difference here is that this is low-rise building, so it might be 1, 2, maybe 3 stories. It's not like we're talking about really tall towers.
Yes, I mean, that's the distinction that the government make on a regular basis, but we've seen some devastating fires in buildings under 18 metres. The Cube in Bolton was one where the fire spread as a result of the cladding. Richmond House was another that's was under 11 metres, and the building actually burnt down with people losing their homes. So height is not a clear indicator of how dangerous a building is, but the government have failed again to come up with a sophisticated assessment of risk, meaning that height is really all that we have to go on. And, to use the kind of standard approach of 18 metres, it just doesn't work in our view.
So what other metrics should be brought into the decision making if you're saying at the moment it's just height?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that you should take into account, things like whether the building has sprinklers, fire alarms. So it seems like an obvious one, but a lot of these buildings don't have fire alarms, coordinated fire alarms that go off across the whole building. Any sort of internal issues, things like compartmentation issues, whether there's sufficient fire breaks in place, they're all really important in assessing the risk, not only to the building but to life safety, and that's what we should be looking at rather than just assessing it on a pure height basis.
Do you think there's ever a place for this kind of plastic foam insulation on any building?
I mean, it's difficult to say, but I think if there are sufficient sufficient measures in place to prevent fires in these sort of small, maybe 2-3 story buildings, then possibly. But again, we won't know how dangerous that cladding is until we do a sophisticated assessment of risk on that building. What we shouldn't be doing is simply allowing it to be put on more and more buildings nearly 4 years since Grenfell, when it seems that we just haven't learnt those lessons.
As you say, we are 4 years since the Grenfell Tower fire disaster. I wonder what other lessons there are still to be learned. I mean, we keep reading in the papers about people with Grenfell-style cladding on tower blocks still and the like. How much is there still to sort out?
The problem is huge, but this is just on what we're seeing on the ground. But the government actually don't have any data on how big the problem could be. And as we say, this is nearly 4 years on. So we're seeing a lot of the higher rise buildings being tested, but really there is no, from buildings under 18 metres, we're still not clear on how big that problem could be. And for those under 11 metres, again, that is a huge number of buildings, but we just don't know how much. And the problem is there is no sort of national effort to do this. It's really left up to individual freeholders, individual developers, to be looking at these issues rather than a sort of coordinated effort across the board. And really, 4 years on, we shouldn't be in this position. We're really risking every day that people are living, working, sleeping in these buildings is another day that we're risking another terrible tragedy like Grenfell. And in our view, it's simply unacceptable.
And tell us about your situation, Natasha. You're a leaseholder.
Yes, I'm an affected leaseholder living in Southampton. So I live in a one-bed flat here, which is, we've got HPL cladding, so not the same type as on Grenfell, but we have Kingspan insulation, which is it was the type that was on Grenfell, and our whole building needs to be remediated. So that work started around a month ago, and we're very lucky in that we've had building safety funding, but we're going to be living on a building site for the next 18 months. So this is, and the last year has just been the worst. The worst year of my life, I have to say. It's, thinking that you're living in an unsafe building and having to play out that sort of scenario of what if the fire alarm goes off? Will I have time to get down 6 flights of stairs? It's terrifying.
Thanks for your time this morning. Natasha Letchford from the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign. First of all, talking to us about that story, which is in some of the papers this morning, the fact that this plastic foam insulation, which was used on Grenfell Tower 4 years ago, contributed to the disaster. It is still being used on low buildings, and the Guardian newspaper has done a run on the numbers and found that it's used in an estimated 70 schools around the country. An incredible situation.